Thomas Bellingham stood in his grand California home, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses surrounding him like an invisible wall. The gala was a spectacle of wealth and glamour, with guests draped in designer clothes, but Thomas felt no joy. Instead, a thick sense of ennui wrapped around him, suffocating his spirit. He scanned the room, watching as people exchanged empty pleasantries, their smiles as artificial as the sparkling chandeliers above. In the corner of the room, he noticed Elijah, a waiter dressed in black, moving swiftly between tables. Unlike the others, Elijah seemed truly engaged in his work. His face lit up with genuine warmth as he served drinks and chatted with guests, for reasons he could not fully understand. This simple act ignited a spark of unwarranted anger in Thomas. Why should this man, with his humble job, appear more alive than he did in this sea of opulence? Suddenly, an idea struck him, reckless and cruel. Thomas strode across the room, his heart racing with a mix of excitement and disdain. As he reached Elijah, he raised his voice, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. "Look at this one, ladies and gentlemen. A mere waiter, trying to act as if he belongs in our world," he sneered, laughter punctuating his words. The room fell silent, shock rippling through the crowd as they absorbed the scene unfolding before them. Elijah's face flushed with shame, his eyes darting to the ground. Thomas felt a flicker of uncertainty, a tiny voice whispering doubts in his mind. What had he just done? The laughter around him faded, and for a moment, he was left alone with the weight of his actions. The emptiness that drove him to humiliate another human being hung heavy in the air, a reminder of the hollowness that defined his life. As the night wore on, the gala continued, but Thomas found no joy in the festivities. Instead, he replayed the moment in his mind, the way Elijah had lowered his head in defeat. Was this the man he wanted to be? The question gnawed at him, leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. He glanced around the room, at the people who had once seemed so important, and realized that their laughter now felt like a distant echo, devoid of meaning. "Why do you always have to be so cruel?" A voice suddenly broke through his thoughts. It was Clara, his sister, her expression a mix of disappointment and anger. "You think you're better than everyone else because of your money, but this is not who you are." Thomas opened his mouth to protest, but the words stuck in his throat. Clara continued, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Do you even know who Elijah is? He's a family friend. He's been through so much, and you just humiliated him in front of everyone." The weight of her words struck him like a slap. He had not considered Elijah's story, the struggles that lay behind the polite smile he had so callously mocked. "I didn't know," Thomas muttered, his voice almost a whisper, the realization hitting him harder than any accusation. "Exactly. You live in your own bubble, Thomas," Clara said, her eyes glistening with frustration. "You need to wake up. You're a prisoner of your privilege, and it's time to face the consequences of your actions." As the night dragged on, the laughter of the gala faded into the background, replaced by the echo of Clara's words. The emptiness that had once seemed so familiar now felt suffocating. Thomas was left with the uncomfortable truth that he had crossed a line, and the guilt began to seep into his heart. What had driven him to such cruelty? Why did he feel so disconnected from the very people he shared a world with? The questions lingered in his mind, unanswered and persistent, as he watched the guests around him, each one a reflection of the life he led. In that moment, he knew he had to confront the darkness within himself. The night was far from over, but Thomas was no longer the same man who had entered the gala. The weight of silence hung heavy in the air, and for the first time, he felt the stirrings of change. The night air was cool as Thomas stepped out of his lavish home, the echoes of laughter and clinking glasses fading behind him. He felt a mix of anger and confusion swirling in his chest. He had always been the center of attention, the one others looked up to. But tonight, something had shifted. The weight of his actions pressed heavily on his mind. As he walked down the gravel path, he heard footsteps behind him. It was Clara, his sister. Her voice cut through the silence like a sharp knife. "Thomas," she called, her tone filled with urgency. He turned to face her, his expression a mix of defiance and irritation. "What do you want, Clara? Can't you see I need some space?" "Space?" Clara shook her head, disbelief in her eyes. "You need to listen to yourself for once. What you did back there was unacceptable." Thomas crossed his arms, trying to shield himself from her words. "I don't need a lecture, Clara. You don't understand the pressure I'm under." "Pressure?" She scoffed. "What about Elijah? You humiliated him in front of all those people. He's a family friend, Thomas. He has worked hard his entire life just to get by, and you treat him like that?" At the mention of Elijah's name, Thomas felt a pang of guilt. "I didn't know," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara took a step closer, her eyes piercing into his. "You didn't bother to know. You live in this bubble of privilege, and you don't see the world around you. Elijah has faced so much hardship, and you just threw it all away with a few cruel words." Thomas looked away, unable to meet her gaze. The weight of her words sank into him like a stone. "What do you want me to say?" he asked, frustration creeping back into his voice. "Apologize," Clara said firmly. "You need to face what you've done. It's not just about you, Thomas. It's about how your actions affect others. You need to take a long, hard look at yourself." He ran a hand through his hair, feeling the heat of shame rise to his face. "I didn't mean to hurt him," he finally said, his voice trembling. I felt so disconnected, like I was surrounded by people who didn't care." Clara softened for a moment, understanding flickering in her eyes. "Being disconnected doesn't give you the right to hurt others. You have to find a way to connect, to understand the people you dismiss so easily." "I don't know how," Thomas admitted, his voice cracking. "I've always been told that success means power and wealth. I don't know what it means to be humble or to truly care." Clara let out a deep breath, her shoulders relaxing. "It starts with listening, Thomas. It starts with recognizing your privilege and using it to help others. You have the power to make a difference if you choose to." Thomas felt a surge of emotion. For the first time, he began to see the world through a different lens. "What if I try to find Elijah? What if I apologize?" he asked, a hint of hope creeping into his voice. Clara smiled, her eyes shining. "That would be a good first step. But remember, it's not just about saying sorry. It's about understanding and making amends. You have to be willing to change." As they stood there, the cool night air wrapping around them, Thomas felt the heaviness in his chest begin to lift. Clara's words echoed in his mind, urging him to confront the consequences of his actions. He knew the road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time, he felt a flicker of determination. "Okay," he said, taking a deep breath. "I'll find him. I'll apologize." With that promise hanging in the air, he and Clara turned to walk back into the night, both knowing that this was just the beginning of a long journey towards redemption. Thomas Bellingham stood at the entrance of a small cafe, his heart pounding. The modest building felt worlds away from the opulence of his home. The memories of the gala replayed in his mind, each moment a sharp reminder of Elijah's humiliation. Guilt twisted in his stomach as he stepped inside, the bell above the door chiming softly. The cafe was warm and inviting, filled with the rich aroma of coffee and baked goods. A few patrons sat at small tables, their conversations blending into a comforting hum. Thomas spotted Elijah in the corner, sitting alone with a cup of steaming coffee. The sight of him, so unaffected by the glitz and glamour Thomas was used to, caused a wave of shame to wash over him. Taking a deep breath, Thomas approached the table. "Elijah?" he said softly, his voice barely rising above the cafe's buzz. Elijah looked up, his expression cautious. "What do you want, Thomas?" I wanted to talk," Thomas replied, his words stumbling out. "About what happened at the gala?" Elijah's gaze hardened. "You mean when you humiliated me in front of everyone?" "Yes," Thomas admitted, his chest tightening. "I'm really sorry. I let my anger get the best of me, and I took it out on you. You didn't deserve that." Elijah's eyes narrowed, but he remained silent. Thomas could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on them, a mixture of regret and vulnerability hanging in the air. "Please, let me explain," Thomas urged, his hands fidgeting with the edge of the table. "I've been reflecting on my actions. I've realized how detached I am from reality. I thought I was better than everyone else, and I treated you like you were less than me. It was wrong." Elijah's expression softened just a fraction, but he still held back. "You don't get to just say you're sorry and expect everything to be fine. Your actions have consequences." "I know," Thomas replied, his voice filled with earnestness. "I've been living in a bubble, surrounded by wealth and status, but I see now how empty it is. I want to change. Can you allow me to make it right?" Elijah took a long sip of his coffee, contemplating Thomas's words. "What do you think that looks like? How do you plan to make things right?" "I don't know yet," Thomas admitted, "but I want to help. I want to understand what you go through, what people like you go through every day. I want to use my privilege to make a difference, not just for myself, but for others too." Elijah leaned back in his chair, still skeptical. "It sounds good, but words are just words. You have to show that you mean it." "Then let me help you," Thomas offered, his heart racing with hope. "I want to learn. I want to support you and your community. Just give me a chance." For a moment, silence enveloped them. Thomas could see the conflict in Elijah's eyes, the struggle between trust and caution. Finally, Elijah spoke, his voice steady. "All right, but it's not going to be easy. You'll have to face the truth about your life and the lives of others." "I'm ready," Thomas said, a newfound determination sparking within him. "I'm tired of the emptiness. I want to fill my life with real connections." Elijah nodded slowly, the tension in the air beginning to lift. "Then let's start by talking about what you can do. There are families in need, people who are struggling. You can help them." As they talked, Thomas felt a shift within himself. Each word exchanged with Elijah peeled away layers of his past arrogance, exposing a desire for genuine connection. He listened intently as Elijah shared stories of his struggles, the weight of his family's challenges, and how small acts of kindness had made a difference in their lives. "People don't need grand gestures," Elijah explained. "They just need someone who cares." Thomas absorbed every word, realizing that his previous pursuits of wealth and status had led him astray. "I want to be that person," he said, a sense of purpose igniting in him. "I want to show that I care." Their conversation continued, flowing like the rich coffee in their cups. With each moment, Thomas felt lighter, as if the burdens of his past were beginning to lift. The path to redemption was long, but for the first time, he felt ready to walk it. After their emotional conversation at the cafe, Thomas Bellingham sat in his study, staring out at the sprawling landscape of his estate. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. He felt different, as if a weight had shifted within him. The memory of Elijah's quiet dignity lingered in his mind, urging him to act. With a deep breath, Thomas picked up his phone and began to scroll through his contacts. He hesitated for a moment, but then he called Clara. When she answered, there was a hint of surprise in her voice. "Thomas, is everything okay?" Clara asked, sensing the change in his tone. "Yes, Clara, I think I want to do something meaningful," he replied, his voice steady yet uncertain. Clara paused, taken aback. "Meaningful? What do you mean?" "I want to help those in need. I've been thinking about Elijah and his family. I want to reach out to them," Thomas explained, his heart racing. "I want to support local charities, maybe even start something of my own." Clara's breath caught in her throat. "Are you serious? This is a big change for you." "I know. It's time I stop living in my bubble. I want to make a difference," he said, his resolve strengthening. "Can you help me?" "Of course. I can help you find organizations that really make an impact. "It's going to be a journey, you know," she replied, her voice filled with warmth. "I'm ready for it," Thomas assured her. "I want to do better." Over the next few weeks, Thomas dove headfirst into his new mission. He researched local charities and met with community leaders. Each conversation opened his eyes to the struggles faced by so many. He began to understand the depth of need that existed just beyond the gates of his estate. One afternoon, as he was reviewing a list of local charities, Clara joined him. "What do you think about this one?" she asked, pointing to a small organization focused on helping families in need. "They provide food and clothing for those who can't afford it." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "It sounds perfect. I want to contribute, financially and with my time. I need to be involved." Clara smiled, impressed by her brother's commitment. "That's the spirit. Let's set up a meeting with them." A week later, they arrived at the charity's modest office in a community center. The walls were lined with pictures of families they had helped. Thomas felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. He had never been in a place like this before. "Welcome, I'm Maria, the director here," a warm woman said, greeting them. "It's great to see you both. What brings you here?" Thomas took a deep breath. "I want to help. I've realized how much I've taken for granted. I want to support your work, both financially and through volunteering." Maria's eyes widened with surprise. "That's wonderful. We can always use more hands on deck. Your support can make a huge difference." As they discussed ways Thomas could get involved, he felt a sense of purpose growing within him. He realized he was not just giving money, he was becoming part of a community. After the meeting, as they walked back to the car, Clara looked at Thomas, her eyes filled with pride. "I knew you had it in you, Thomas. This is just the beginning." "I hope so," he replied, feeling a warmth in his chest. "I want to be a better person." Days turned into weeks, and Thomas began volunteering regularly at the charity. He met families who had faced hardships he could hardly imagine. Each story brought him closer to understanding the weight of silence that hung in the air around them, a silence born of struggle, resilience, and hope. One day, while sorting donations, he spotted Elijah walking through the door. His heart leaped. "Elijah, I'm glad you're here," Thomas called out, waving him over. Elijah looked surprised, but cautious. "Thomas? What are you doing here?" "I'm volunteering. I want to help, and I'd love for you to join me," Thomas replied, his voice sincere. "I realize how wrong I was before." Elijah studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I appreciate that, Thomas. I'm glad you're trying to make a change." As they worked together, a bond began to form between them, built on mutual respect and understanding. Thomas saw the world through Elijah's eyes and felt the barriers of privilege slowly crumbling away. In that small community center, Thomas found a new path, one filled with purpose, connection, and the promise of change. He was ready to embrace it fully, understanding that true wealth lay not in what he had, but in the lives he could touch. As Thomas dove deeper into his charitable work, he found himself surrounded by familiar faces from his past, each one wearing an expression of doubt. At a community meeting, whispers filled the air as old friends exchanged glances. They questioned his motives, unsure if Thomas Bellingham had truly changed, or if this was just a phase. "Look who decided to join us," one man sneered, leaning back in his chair. "What makes you think you can just waltz in here and play the hero?" Thomas clenched his fists, feeling the weight of their judgment. "I'm not here to play a role," he replied, his voice steady but strained. "I want to help." "Help? You?" The man laughed, shaking his head. "You have no idea what it's like to struggle. You've always had everything handed to you." The words stung, but Thomas stood his ground. He took a deep breath, remembering Elijah's support. "I might have had privilege, but that doesn't mean I don't want to change. I'm trying to make things right." Elijah, sitting quietly in the corner, raised his hand. "He's telling the truth," he said softly but firmly. "I've seen Thomas put in the effort. He's learning. We all start somewhere." The room fell silent as Thomas looked at Elijah, gratitude swelling in his chest. It was a small gesture of support, but it meant the world. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows of his past would follow him. In the days that followed, Thomas immersed himself in the work. He visited shelters, volunteered at food drives, and engaged in conversations that opened his eyes to new realities. But with each step forward, he felt the pull of his old life. The expectations tied to his name lingered like a heavy cloak. One evening, after a long day, Thomas sat across from Elijah at their favorite cafe. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm really cut out for this," he confessed, stirring his coffee. "The more I try, the louder the doubts get." Elijah leaned in, his expression serious. "Change isn't easy, Thomas. You're going against years of conditioning. But you have to remember why you're doing this." Thomas sighed, looking out the window at the bustling street. "I know I've done wrong, but I feel like I'm not making enough of a difference. People still see me as the rich guy trying to play savior." "Then prove them wrong," Elijah encouraged, his voice gentle but firm. "Show them that you care, not just with words, but with actions. You don't need to change everyone's mind overnight." With Elijah's words echoing in his mind, Thomas decided to take action. Together, they brainstormed ideas for a community project. They wanted to create something that would bring people together, something that would show his commitment to true change. "What about a community garden?" Elijah suggested one afternoon. "It could be a place where people can grow their own food. It's a small step, but it connects people." "That's a great idea," Thomas exclaimed, excitement bubbling within him. "We could partner with local schools and teach kids about gardening and healthy eating." As they worked on their plans, the project began to take shape. They reached out to local organizations for support and gathered volunteers. Slowly but surely, the community started to rally around the idea, and Thomas felt a sense of belonging he had never known before. One Saturday morning, as they prepared for the garden's opening day, Thomas looked at the group of volunteers, friends, neighbors, and even some skeptics. He felt a sense of pride swell in his chest. "Thank you all for being here," he said, his voice carrying over the chatter. "This garden is more than just plants and soil. It's about connection, community, and hope." Elijah nodded, standing beside him. "Together, we can make a difference, one seed at a time." As they began to dig and plant, Thomas felt the weight of his past lift just a little. He was not just a man trying to escape his past. He was a part of something bigger, a community united in purpose. And for the first time in a long while, he felt he was on the right path, ready to face whatever came next. The evening sun cast a warm glow over the community center, where the air buzzed with anticipation. Colorful banners hung from the walls, celebrating the project that Thomas and Elijah had worked so hard to create. People from all walks of life gathered, smiling and chatting, eager to see what the night would bring. Thomas stood at the edge of the crowd, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. "Thomas, are you ready?" Clara approached him, her eyes sparkling with pride. He nodded slowly, glancing at the stage where Elijah would soon speak. "I think so. I just hope I can express everything I feel." Clara placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You've come so far. Just speak from your heart. That's all anyone wants." As the crowd settled, Thomas took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. He looked around, seeing familiar faces, the people he had once overlooked in his pursuit of wealth. Each of them had a story, a struggle, and now they were all here to celebrate the change they had created together. When Elijah stepped onto the stage, the crowd erupted in applause. Thomas watched as his friend stood confidently, a man transformed by resilience and understanding. Elijah smiled warmly, scanning the audience before speaking. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice steady. "This project started as a dream, a way to bring us all together, to share our stories and support one another. I never imagined it would grow into this beautiful community." Thomas felt a swell of emotion as he listened to Elijah. He recalled the first time they met in that cafe, the raw honesty between them, and how it had changed his life. Elijah continued, "I have faced many challenges, but I learned that kindness can bridge even the widest gaps. Thomas showed me that change is possible when we decide to stand together." The crowd responded with applause, and Thomas felt a warmth spread through his chest. Elijah's words resonated deeply, reminding him of the journey they had taken. After Elijah spoke, Thomas stepped forward, the spotlight now on him. He felt the eyes of the community on him, curious, hopeful. "I stand here tonight, not just as a man of privilege, but as a man who has learned the real value of connection." His voice trembled slightly, but he pressed on. "I used to think that wealth defined me. But it was the moments of vulnerability, the stories shared with people like Elijah, that truly opened my eyes." He paused, searching for the right words. "I was lost in my own world, blind to the struggles around me. But now, I see. I see the strength in our community, and I understand that together, we can create a legacy of compassion." The audience listened intently, the silence hanging heavy with shared understanding. Thomas felt the weight of their hopes resting on his shoulders. "I promise to continue this work, to support those who need it most. We can lift each other up, one act of kindness at a time." As he finished, the crowd erupted into applause. Thomas felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes, overwhelmed by the support and love surrounding him. He caught Elijah's eye, and they exchanged a look of mutual respect and gratitude. After the speeches, people mingled, sharing stories and laughter. Thomas moved through the crowd, shaking hands and embracing those he had once overlooked. Clara joined him, her smile bright with pride. "You did it, Thomas," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "You've changed so much." "I couldn't have done it without Elijah," he replied, glancing across the room. Elijah was deep in conversation, animated and happy. "He taught me more than I could ever repay." As the night wore on, Thomas felt a sense of belonging he had never known before. He realized that this was just the beginning. The journey of redemption was ongoing, and every act of kindness could spark hope. Looking toward the future, Thomas knew he would always strive to build connections and foster understanding. He was ready to embrace this new legacy, one filled with compassion, empathy, and the promise of a better tomorrow, a future where silence would no longer weigh heavy, but where voices would unite in strength and love. Share this story if you believe that connection and kindness can transform lives and build stronger communities. Leave a comment about a moment when you witnessed the power of empathy in action, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this. Together, let's spread the message of hope and compassion.